Hello and welcome to How Hollywood Works. I'm your host, Molly Hirsch, and today we are so thrilled to be joined by Daisy von Scherler Mayer, TV and film director. Hi, Daisy.
Hi, Molly.
Hi. I'm so happy you're here today. So let's get right to it.
Great.
In the last couple years, you've directed all different types of shows, ranging from drama to comedy and shows that have been on the air longer versus newer shows like Mozart in the Jungle. So would you say that it's more challenging to direct, more established shows that have that set following like House of Lies versus, newer shows that are still looking for their audience?
It's always challenging. Directing TV is very challenging, no matter what you're doing. But I would say that I almost prefer doing the new shows. They're more challenging, but they haven't become so set in their ways. I mean, House of Lies is always a blast because that's just an incredibly talented and fun group of people that are always trying to mix it up. They do a lot of improv, so they keep that one fresh. But I'm not very interested in going on to the show that's been on for 7 years where the actors are all directing and you feel like the caterer's directing, everybody's directing, and it feels like it's lost. I don't know, when shows are new, you're able to influence the visual style more, you're able to influence sort of the atmosphere on set, like you feel like you're really having an impact on what that show, how the process of that show will happen.
So you're saying that you feel limited, you can't, bring very much to the table?
Well, I mean, I'm talking about, and I haven't really been in this situation, but, I'm talking about like you hear about shows that have done, 10 years, Law and Order or whatever. Actually, a friend of mine enjoyed working on that one, but where they're so set in their ways, it's like a factory. That's what I always want to stay away from with television, is any show that is trying to be new and interesting and keep it fresh is going to be more interesting to me, because I have a theater background and a film background, than the ones where you feel like they've made it the exact same way and they continue to over and over again. And TV in general is getting out of that mold.
Definitely. And do you think that, that like a drama versus a like people in drama are much more set in their character, and people in comedy have the ability to play around with it more in terms of being a longer show, or you think that just in general?
It's the type of dramas that I've worked on. The difference has been that there is a much higher the type of dramas that I've worked on, it feels like the visuals are much more important. That's sort of the difference between the comedy element, that you're really trying to make it look like a movie. There's no drama TV show that I've worked on that hasn't said, we don't want it to look like a TV show, we want it to look like a film, we want you to be take chances and not necessarily cover things in traditional ways. The comedies are less about that. They really are more about the jokes and the characters and keeping it fun and fresh. So I would say that the dramas hold up to just a higher visual style. And that can be also a more aggressive shooting style, more location, more out there. They're demanding in that aspect.
So are they demanding in terms of, like, as a director, you have a vision, you have a perspective, a different perspective that they bring to the table. That's why they hire different directors, is because they want to keep their show fresh. They want to keep, their viewers on their toes. They want to have, not the same show that they produce weekly or monthly or whatever. Would you say that you have you're not able to bring that type of perspective that you'd like to in some cases?
No, I mean, I feel like, well, the difference between film directing and TV directing is that film directing, every choice is yours, every creative decision is yours, and they'll fire 20 writers, but the director's vision is always the most important. TV is different. It's really about the writer's auteur and the writer's the visionary. That said, more and more as pilots become more interesting, as new people are getting into, like Mozart in the Jungle was Roman Coppola and Jason Schwartzman and Alex Hunter, I think, were the creators, and they really wanted the directors to have incredible amounts of power. But they're doing it on Amazon, so they're a little more renegade. It's a little bit, I feel like Netflix is kind of the same way in terms of really wanting to have it be more director vision driven. But that said, I feel like even within established dramas, as long as you're in the ballpark of the pilot, which you look at, like Shameless is all handheld. That's going to be crazy and chaotic and handheld. If you came in there and suddenly said you wanted to put everything on the dolly, they would say that's not our show. But within there, and when I sign on for a show, it's because I like the visual style, because I want to emulate that, but I always try and bring something different to it. So usually there's, especially on the cable side, there's a lot of leeway to make it your own within some set boundaries. And then on the new show, sometimes you're the first one to do the long walk and talk through the hall, and then that becomes a regular thing that they do every week because it worked well. So there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, understandable. And so you bring up the different types of networks, and these days the landscape and the outlets of television are really changing. We see Amazon TV is new and just came out, and you've actually worked on Mozart in the Jungle, which is one of their newer shows, and Netflix, which we've actually on How Hollywood Works, we've learned a lot about the inner workings of Netflix and how from the perspective of a creator and an actor, and kind of the freedom that they get to bring their own view into it. I know it's different as a director, but what would you say, because you have worked on Amazon, like I said, Mozart in the Jungle, Netflix with Orange is the New Black, and on just conventional networks, what would you say is like the main difference there in directing?
It's interesting.
For those?
Both Orange is the New Black and Mozart in the Jungle shoot in New York, and sometimes there's just a different vibe also in being in New York. So as a scientist, when you're trying to say, well, what are the variables? Both those shows did have a lot of, I would say, indie filmmakers involved behind the scenes. And you can look to Transparent with Jill Soloway, that's another one. So I feel like bringing that indie film energy to the internet television gives it definitely, as a director, you feel there's more of a sense of creative freedom, and that I guess it is a little more director driven than, when I was saying before, a lot of times the distinction that you'll be told is that television is extremely writer driven. But that said, again, I would say the cable world, and the real difference to me is not cable versus online. It's network television versus everything else. And network television really is still, I think, trying to hit certain sort of entertainment rhythms that they believe audiences like. Like Mad Men never had acts. There was no first act, second act, third act, so there was no cliffhanger, because it was just all going to be, Matt Weiner would just be like, end the first act wherever you want. I don't care. I'm telling my story as if it's a movie. And truthfully, so many people stream now, and that's been a huge impact of Netflix. And is that if you're watching Mad Men on Netflix, then you're really not paying attention to those act breaks. But that kind of rhythm of storytelling, I think, is getting eaten away at. And I don't think we'll continue to always feel like the first act has to end with this, or things like that.
Do you have a preference as to which network you like to work for?
Oh no, I don't have a preference which network. In fact, no.
Smart answer.
Yes, exactly. I would be welcome at all of your networks. No, I mean, because they're great. Like I just did About a Boy on NBC, and that was really fun. And it's not like, when I said that there's higher demands for the visuals in dramas, that doesn't mean dramas are easier. Like, you get there on those comedy sets and it has to be funny, and if it isn't funny on the page, then we're all, even in that show, which isn't a multi-camera, it's still all hands on deck to make this beat work, or make this moment work, or make this moment with the kid feel genuine. And it's, working with kids is harder. And so there was a lot of on the fly kind of thinking about things and coming up with things, which is exciting and adrenaline, and that's what makes TV directing an awesome, wonderful job. But it's not necessarily easier. But that was network comedy, and I enjoyed it, although I don't think it's lasting, so maybe it's not a
So ultimately, at the end of the day, all of these networks are really business driven. And
but I think it's the models of business driven are changing to me, because when you can get this small niche of viewers who are really wealthy, suddenly it's all up for grabs. You know what I mean? I think Mad Men showed that it never got very many viewers, but they had money for advertising dollars. And so I feel like people are, if you can find your audience. I work on The Fosters, which is an ABC family show, and just the fans of that show are just so diehard, and they love it, and I love it because it deals with a lot of social issues, and I like working with teenagers, and it's fun. But that's a much more mainstream area. But if you find your group, I just feel like it pays off. That edit that I don't know where that went. I lost my train.
Yeah, definitely. So the viewers really do have a massive impact on not only,
Well, I feel like loyal viewers, it's like you look at the community viewers, they all watched that show and they loved that show, and that show kept living after it had supposedly died because they were still there. And I feel like the hard part is reaching your generation just to know about a show. You know what I mean? The show that I did called *Halt and Catch Fire* for AMC is a great show about the 80s espionage in the computer world. Nobody I know has heard of it. Nobody watched it. Will it find its people? And yet they brought it back because they artistically believed in it. And I feel like that's definitely my experience of being on set with the Netflix and Amazon shows is that they seem to really be trusting their artists.
Yeah.
Whether that'll continue, there's much less interference on okay, we have our reading with 3,000 executives. You don't know what half of them do. You don't know what department, you know what I mean? And I feel like there's a lot of, as they say, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So that is, the more people influencing, I think, any artistic endeavor, the worse it becomes. And the more, singular a vision, the better it is. So if it's just the writer and me and the actor, and then, the producer, like the smaller that group is and the easier access there is to the head. At Showtime, I love working for Showtime. David Nevins, the head of Showtime, he sits there and he goes line by line. If he has a note, it's him, head guy, to John Cheadle, producer star. They're having a conversation. There aren't 25 executives rewriting, and then it becomes a game of telephone of he said he wants it softer, but he really meant, just things get really discombobulated the more artistic people that are involved. So, and what I'm looking for as a director is always to have clarity. Like, what's the point of the scene? What's the point of what you're doing? Where should the camera be to tell that story? Like, clarity is what we're looking for. So the more mom and dad are fighting at the table, the harder it is for us to get clarity of what the point of the
vision.
The vision is the point of the scene.
Definitely, and I think as a viewer, from a viewer's perspective, in today's world, especially with the Amazons and the Netflix outlets, it's so much easier for people these days to just hit click. Like I'm gonna try watching this show and see how I like it. You know what I mean? So people have that ability, as opposed to on cable TV on the conventional networks, they have to record it and then they have to schedule a time to sit down and watch it, and it's harder. But you have the opportunity to watch whatever you want when you want it. So they are reaching out to a greater audience and different people who not only, like, they don't only prefer mysteries, but they reach out to everyone.
I mean, one of the things that we have to do is spend some money and make it look great, because we can't compete with YouTube. We can't compete with reality television.
But the problem is,
you know what I mean? You can't compete with that unless you're going to be giving them a kind of storytelling that can't be done in your living room. That means on the writing level, it means on the shooting level, on the acting level. Like, it's all got to come up, and I feel like that's why it's the golden age of television. Like, so much great material is happening,
and the competition is that much greater.
Yes,
because, like I was saying, because everyone has the opportunity to watch whatever they want to watch.
But have you seen that? I mean, it's not.
I know
good.
it's not great. It's not. But it's not great at all. Not at all. But some shows are amazing, whereas others you're bored the whole time.
Right.
But at least you have that chance to try watching it. So that's what makes the competition so competitive, I guess, because you are looking to capture that viewer and to keep them watching your show.
My hope is also that this technology makes it more egalitarian, because if it's not so expensive to get a camera, if it's not so expensive, if you and your friends can do it, then maybe more people will start doing it that aren't from the same. Hollywood's been sort of a pretty non-diverse place for a very long time, and if access to the technology makes it easier to become a director, easier to become a filmmaker, then we'll get more interesting stories. Then we'll reach those communities that are underrepresented. Jane the Virgin or whatever. Well, how many Hispanic shows are there on TV? Watch, you do one and see how well it does. Like,
you could even, argue it's so easy for anyone to make a movie.
But it's not easy to make it good.
That's true.
So in the indie film world, I've lost interest in the indie film world because there's so much product and there's so little outlets for it. And so it has to be so good to get. I mean, I was a hit of Sundance. I still think that movie would be the hit of Sundance, but it would be a lot harder now. It's a lot. kids aren't going to that world. I feel like television is more interesting in terms of independent voices now. And hopefully what we're talking about, like the YouTube star or whatever, can be making their own transparent or their own story, which is one we haven't heard before. So we're not just always telling the same. That's why
and bring
the shows that are on the, I feel like the internet shows are going into arenas like the woman's prison or classical music. These are not arenas that were, they wouldn't make it through network development season. They would say, no, this isn't accessible enough. And when I made Party Girl, they said, why can't you set it in Chicago? She's unlikable. All these things that are sort of typical. Again, when we're doing it by a formula that's so old, I don't know that formula really applies
That the
anymore.
industry has to kind of evolve as the world around them is evolving.
Before we wrap up, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, I would love
so
that.
So you haven't asked me. I've never done one of these where I don't get asked about being a woman director. Because
I was going there.
Oh, okay.
We're not done yet. We're not done.
But I was curious because you don't lead with that, which I really appreciate. Because there's part of me that gets bored of like, well, it's just, there's nothing to say about it. A director is a director. But do you think your generation is less aware? Do you think your generation that's less of a big deal than it is for mine?
I think it's definitely, I know, you're the first woman that I've had on the show ever. So, granted, we haven't had very many shows, but it's a big deal for me. And I think that in the industry, it's definitely, like, I'm aware that there's more pressure to hire women and give women that role. Not saying that women aren't deserving of that role, but I do find it interesting. How is it being a woman in the industry? Is it more competitive for you?
It's just a really small minority that doesn't seem to change. So there's
and not
a
only
lot
women,
of articles all the time. Where are the women directors? Where are the directors? And by the way, I'm here. Hi. But there aren't very many of us, and it doesn't seem to get better, which makes me believe that somebody doesn't really want it to change, because then, like, if you look at statistics for hiring first-time directors, 87% are white men. So it's like, okay, well, there's not a huge interest in this, no matter how many articles are written about it. But I do feel like with Title IX and sports and schools, things really have changed over time.
Definitely. Every day things change.
The
Every day,
Olympics and with sports
yearly.
in general, the WNBA. So you do feel like there can be a difference, but I feel like it may take still another generation to make it happen. I'm not quite sure how.
Does that affect your attitude when you go into a new work, or your mentality, how you want to present yourself?
I always feel like the best revenge is just doing a great job, but it
so you
is
see it as
disheartening.
Revenge?
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit.
Interesting.
You do feel, not on all shows, on plenty of shows it's fine. Most people on television shows just want to go out. They just want to get out on time or early.
Yeah.
Like it's not so different than high school. As the director, everybody wants you to do a great job, particularly the higher ups, but just sort of general people on set don't want their time to be wasted. I'm not saying they're lazy. They just don't want us to spend another 20 minutes on something that, as far everybody on set can decide that the scene was done. We're all there to know that there's a process to it. So to be exceptionally prepared, I do feel like there's a little bit of an Eric Holder, like the first Black Attorney General, where you're like, yes, I have to be like slightly better at my job and make sure that we definitely
So you
get
can
out
prove
on
yourself.
time. Yeah, because you want to feel it, because so many people will say, oh, I've never worked for a woman before, it's so great. So you feel like you're representing. Of course, we're half the human race, so how could I possibly represent anyone? There's way too many of us for me to be indicative. Or for the bad woman director that they had 2 shows ago to make me,
look
shine
bad.
badly on
Yes.
me. Yeah.
Have you ever felt that you weren't able to get a job simply because of the fact that you're a woman?
So how would I know? Whenever I see people say that, I was like, how do I know?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like if you have the Jewish last name or you whatever and you didn't get into the thing, how do you know? I never know that. I don't know. You know what I mean? I can't.
But you
there
do
are
see it
certain
as
shows you can look at shows and say, well, they never hired a woman. In the 10 years that show was on the air, they never hired a woman. Really? Was there never anybody that was qualified? There obviously are some qualified women. But I think it has to be, I do a lot of mentoring at AFI Director Women's Workshop and at other things, and I think it has to come on a preparing women so that they crush it the first time they're up to bat. And I think too often people have been given opportunities maybe that just weren't ready or hadn't been, I don't know, somehow we've gotten a bad rap because why isn't it happening more?
So you think that one woman director who wasn't prepared for her job, you think that that does affect the entire pool
It
of women
shouldn't, but it
directors.
does. I mean, I'm sure it does with the black director or with any other director that you just don't, most directors look the same, and that's the truth, and that's something we can all work to change. But it has to be on a nurturing level where people are given a lot of opportunity. And then you can look at, there's a lot of women getting out of film school that somehow aren't getting jobs on shows, and there's a lot of men getting out of film school that are. Mm-hmm. So, like, I know a woman DP who's fantastic, who got offered a directing job but can't get a DP job. And she shot 7 Sundance films and, many nominated, all that stuff.
And speaking of film, because you are a competitive directing woman, your first film you made when you were 27, and it's celebrating actually its 20th anniversary this year, Party Girl.
Makes me 32.
Oh, younger.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it like? I mean, typically you find directors that start in TV and aspire to make films, but yet you, interestingly enough, you started in film and then made your way to TV.
I mean, I've done 5 feature films. I'm proud of 4 of them. And I would say, I made a kids film with Frances McDormand, Madeline, and I made The Guru, which was a crazy sex British comedy farce that I love. And I had those experiences, and those were wonderful, but I do feel like right now television is a more exciting place to be. And having taken some time off in between the two where I was writing and doing other things, it's like, oh no, I'm happy to come back, and this is what was going on, essentially. It's almost like you take a break, you come back, and nobody's wearing blue anymore, everybody's into purple. So it's like, okay, that's where, I go where the good writing is.
Yeah,
For me as a director, go where the writing is. You can never be better than the writing. I don't believe you can.
I get that. So you say television is, more interesting, and it's become more interesting, and it really is the hot spot in the industry now. You can see that. What do you think is the difference? How do you think that it's evolved throughout the years? How do you think that television has become, hotter than films?
Part of it for me about independent, they stopped making films for adults, period. I mean, they used to make many, many, many more movies for adults, and they just don't make them because they realized if they made a movie for a 14-year-old boy, his girlfriend will go with him, his parents will go with him, and he'll rent it 25 times or go back to the theater 25 times. And then it was like, let's just put all our chips on 14-year-old boy. We'll just do, comic book, because those other movies, they make money, but do they make that? Kramer versus Kramer, how much money did that make? You know what I mean? Like, even the hits of the past, which were adult content, when you realize you could have everybody going to all the same movies, adults, kids, no rated R, it was just greedy. It's just greed. So then you get into the independent films where then big celebrities started making, we want to make adult films. So now George Clooney's doing it. Well, then if you're just more regular and not George Clooney, is your independent going to be able to compete with his and with Kate Winslet's and the ones that they, it just, the pie got so small for adult films because nobody's making them. I mean, thank God for Woody Allen making one every year. Let's just keep making something that's not for children and not for young, not cartoon-based.
So you think this, the popularity in TV is mainly because of that downfall in films? Do you think that TV
adults, adults also, the reason that they don't make adult films is adults weren't going out of the house enough. So we're all a bunch of lazy people that sit in our houses. Our TV screens got a lot bigger. Our stereos got a lot bigger. So if we're going to be lazy yuppies with home entertainment systems, and that's where the adults are going to be, then we're going to make media for the adults in their homes. And what's interesting is it's almost feels like, I don't know, that it's bringing people out. Adults are talking about television as if it's books in this way that sometimes when people say, you've got to see such and such, I want to say, well, no, I want to read a book. I mean, I understand that there's smart television, but there's also great literature. But it's become more acceptable, I feel like, for a more intellectual base. And therefore it will, because it's being talked about, get made more, and maybe the greed can work towards the positive. That got convoluted, but it does make sense.
Yeah, and like you said, the adults talking as if it were books, that ties back completely to the competitiveness and the type of audience that they're reaching out for. You do see a lot more intellectual TV these days, I think.
I remember the head of Columbia Pictures. I made Madeline, and it made $30 million. It didn't make a ton of money, but the head of the studio said, you know what I learned on your movie, Daisy? We got girls from 5 to 10, but we got all of them. So
I watched it.
It did
love that
really
movie.
well because it got everybody who was right for that movie saw that movie, and they made their money back, and they got what they needed.
It did exactly what it was supposed to do.
So maybe in terms of directors doing original material, we can get it on TV for adults.
So something I ask all my guests, and I'm interested to hear your answer. What advice do you have for the student who wants to be this very prolific director someday?
Just be bold and don't be afraid and make mistakes, but keep doing it. The only thing you can do is do it, and don't focus on the business aspect of it. I feel like that's the one thing that's very difficult about growing up in Los Angeles is it's everywhere. And when you go to the Oklahoma Film Festival, Dead Center Film Festival, which is awesome, by the way, you meet these kids that they were just making their movie with their friends just in an insular environment without I guess it's about not being result-driven, be artistic-driven, and you'll find the results. You'll get the results, but you have to really be passionate about doing stuff for fun and making mistakes and just make your work, whatever it's focused on, and then worry about how it's going to get out there. But if you already at age 16 are catering to who you think and what they think they might like, it's just like trying to get somebody to like you in the prom. It's never going to work. You know what I mean? You have to be yourself, and then they will find you.
There you have it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming. This has been wonderful. And that's how Hollywood works. See you next time. Yay.